The story unfolds in the mid-11th century, a time when the northern Song Dynasty shone brightly with cultural achievements and economic might, yet was plagued by underlying structural weaknesses. In 1048, within the vibrant walls of Kaifeng's imperial palace, a prince was born, destined to become Emperor Shenzong of Song. Little did anyone know that this child would one day govern one of the largest economies in the medieval world, commanding royal treasures and vast territories estimated to be worth 2 to 3% of China's total GDP. From his earliest years, Prince Zhao Su was immersed in the company of scholars, philosophers, and officials, each embodying the essence of Confucian ideals. The Song Dynasty's intellectual climate was unparalleled, and the young prince was exposed to the classics, statecraft, and political discourse long before he could fully grasp their significance. Court observers often noted that Zhao Su was unlike the other royal children. He was quiet, thoughtful, observant, and deeply curious about the inner workings of the empire. In 1067, at the age of 19, Zhao Su ascended to the throne as Emperor Shenzong. His rise signaled a generational shift, a move away from a conservative ruling class toward a younger, more ambitious leader who sought to reshape the nation. Shenzong clearly saw what others chose to ignore. Despite its wealth and organization, the Song Empire was struggling under immense financial pressure and military vulnerability. Tribute payments to neighboring Liao dynasty were draining the treasury. Tax burdens were unfairly distributed, disproportionately affecting the poor, and the army, once feared throughout Asia, had grown weak and complacent. Shenzong firmly believed that change was not only possible but absolutely necessary. He soon found the ideal partner in reform. Wang Anshi, a brilliant scholar official renowned for his bold and unconventional ideas. Their partnership sparked an era of comprehensive reforms known as the New Policies. Together, they aimed to bolster the economy, empower the peasantry, reorganize the military, and liberate the empire from its reliance on foreign powers. However, before these reforms could take shape, Shenzong had to confront the paradox at the heart of the Song Dynasty. It was incredibly wealthy, yet fundamentally fragile. The imperial wealth under Shenzong was almost beyond imagination. Kaifeng was the wealthiest and most populous city in the world, teeming with merchants, artisans, and bustling trade. The emperor controlled vast estates, royal treasuries, and state monopolies, whose total value, by modern standards, would rival the largest sovereign wealth funds of today. Historians estimate that the emperor personally controlled assets equivalent to 2 to 3% of China's GDP, making him one of the wealthiest rulers in world history. Yet Shenzong understood a crucial truth that many fail to grasp. Wealth alone could not guarantee national security. A rich but militarily weak empire would always be overshadowed by its neighbors. In private conversations, he often told Wang Anshi, "The Song is rich in culture and prosperity, yet the people and army remain weak. Without strength, wealth means nothing." Thus began the transformation of Emperor Shenzong, not merely as a ruler of great fortune, but as a reformer determined to reshape the very destiny of his dynasty. As the early years of Emperor Shenzong's reign unfolded, the winds of reform swept across the northern Song Empire. Driven by a determination rarely seen in the dynasty, the young emperor empowered Wang Anshi to initiate comprehensive reforms addressing two critical issues: financial strain and military weakness. Despite the empire's immense wealth, the treasury suffered from unstable revenue, while military costs and annual tribute payments continued to escalate. This precarious foundation set the stage for the bold and often controversial transformation known as the New Policies. One of the earliest and most significant reforms was the Green Sprouts Law, a state-run loan program designed to aid farmers. Under the old system, peasants were trapped by predatory lenders who charged exorbitant interest rates, often leading to financial ruin. The new law allowed the government to step in, offering lower interest loans during planting season and collecting repayment after the harvest. It was a revolutionary concept. The state would intervene to protect the poor and stabilize agricultural production. Conservative officials vehemently opposed the law, arguing that government involvement in lending would disrupt the established social order. But Shenzong stood firm. He believed that a strong nation required a stable and secure peasantry. The reforms then extended to transportation and logistics. The transport exchange law sought to reduce the enormous costs associated with moving grain from a fertile south to the northern capitals. By allowing the state to directly manage parts of the supply chain, the government aimed to cut expenses and reduce its dependence on private merchant guilds, which often inflated prices. Military reform soon followed. The Song Dynasty had long been admired for its cultural achievements, but criticized for its weak military. Shenzong saw this as a grave threat to national survival. Thus, he introduced a militia system, training young villagers to serve as reserve forces that could be mobilized when needed. With proper organization and training, the empire could transform its vast population into a powerful defense network. Yet Shenzong's vision extended beyond mere economics and defense. He wanted to reshape the very fabric of society. The imperial examination system, though groundbreaking in its own right, often privileged wealthy families who could afford the extensive education required to succeed. To counter this imbalance, Shenzong implemented a recommendation system, allowing local officials to nominate talented individuals without requiring them to pass the rigid exams. This decision shook the cultural foundations of the Song Dynasty. Scholars feared corruption and the erosion of meritocracy, but Shenzong believed that true talent existed far beyond the confines of elite academies. True ability, he asserted, is not confined to scrolls and ink. However, the deeper the reforms penetrated, the stronger the resistance became. The conservative faction, led by the renowned scholar Sima Guang, launched a fierce counterattack. They argued that the reforms were reckless, destabilizing the very structure that had kept the dynasty peaceful for generations. Heated debates echoed through the imperial court. Ministers openly confronted the emperor's policies, warning that rapid reform would plunge the nation into chaos. But outside the palace walls, the people viewed Shenzong differently. To many peasants, he was the first emperor who dared to challenge the entrenched elites and improve their lives. In villages across the empire, stories circulated about the young ruler who was willing to risk everything to improve their lives. Yet even as popular support grew, financial pressure continued to mount. Despite Shenzong's vast personal wealth, equivalent to 2 to 3% of China's GDP, the state still struggled. Tribute payments to Liao, ongoing military campaigns in the northwest, and the cost of implementing new programs strained the treasury. Facing this crisis, Shenzong expanded land taxes, reorganized grain storage, and reassessed military spending. Court historians later dubbed this era the Great Experiment, as nearly every aspect of governance underwent restructuring. What few fully understood was that despite his outward confidence, Shenzong grappled with internal doubts. He knew he was pushing the empire faster than many could accept, and history had rarely been kind to reformers. Yet he pressed forward, convinced that true strength must come from the people, not from the fragile comfort of old traditions. These reformist years forever transformed Shenzong's legacy. He was no longer simply a wealthy ruler, but a daring architect of national transformation. And from this turning point, his reign would soon enter its most dramatic and turbulent phase. As Emperor Shenzong entered the middle years of his reign, the Song Dynasty stood at a critical crossroads. The empire was wealthy, educated, and culturally vibrant, yet increasingly burdened by a military that struggled to defend its borders and a government apparatus swollen with inefficiency. For Shenzong, these years were defined by his unwavering determination to find a balance between strength and harmony, between reform and stability, and between idealism and the harsh realities of governing an empire. However, history rarely bends smoothly to the will of kings. During this period, Shenzong allowed Wang Anshi's reforms to unfold on a grand scale, believing that dramatic change was essential to rescue the dynasty from decline. Many measures, especially in finance and agriculture, had begun to show tangible effects. State revenue increased. Peasant households received loans to buy seeds and tools, and local granaries stabilized grain prices during difficult seasons. On paper, the empire appeared more organized and efficient than ever before. Yet beneath this veneer of progress, deep opposition simmered. The older aristocrats resented how the reforms weakened their influence and disrupted the established social order. Scholar officials, steeped in classical Confucian principles, viewed these changes as disruptive and even dangerous. Some believe that the emperor was pushing the government too far, too fast, without fully considering the long-term consequences. And in the capital, Kaifeng, political factions sharpened their tongues like blades, ready to strike at any perceived weakness. Those who supported the emperor's vision rallied around Wang Anshi, while a powerful conservative group formed in response, accusing the reform movement of tearing apart the traditions that had kept China stable for centuries. Shenzong found himself at the center of a storm, one of his own making. Despite this rising tension, he pushed forward relentlessly. His belief in a stronger, more resilient state outweighed any fear of backlash. When he reviewed reports from the countryside describing higher harvests or more efficient tax collection, he felt vindicated, his faith in the reforms reinforced. When young scholars praised the new laws as bold and inspiring, he became even more convinced that the Song Dynasty could still ascend to unprecedented heights. But it was the military reforms that would prove to be his greatest and most daunting challenge. The Song Dynasty had always suffered militarily compared to its northern neighbors, especially the Liao Empire. Shenzong understood that without military strength, no amount of cultural brilliance could secure China's future. Thus, he and Wang Anshi embarked on a massive restructure of the armed forces, building new training systems, creating a standing army, and altering military pay and logistics. The intention was sound, rooted in a clear understanding of the empire's strategic vulnerabilities. The execution, however, faced the same fierce resistance as the civil reforms. Veteran commanders disliked having civil officials interfere in military policy. New recruits found the regulations strict and unfamiliar, and the transition was often chaotic. And while some units showed improvement, others struggled to adapt to the new systems. Shenzong read every military report with growing frustration. He wanted results strong enough to reassert the Song Dynasty's power across the northern frontiers and deter potential aggressors. Then came the opportunity he believed he had been waiting for. A dispute erupted with the western Xia kingdom, a smaller but formidable enemy bordering the western frontier. Shenzong viewed this conflict as a chance to test a reformed army and send a clear message to the world. The Song Empire was no longer the passive, vulnerable power of old. With determination and confidence, he ordered several campaigns against the western Xia. But war, as history often demonstrates, is an unforgiving crucible. The campaigns were far from the decisive victories Shenzong had envisioned. Harsh terrain, miscommunication among generals, and the inexperience of restructured units turned promising strategies into costly struggles. Some battles were won, but many were inconclusive or outright unsuccessful. The emperor, who had pinned so much hope on turning military reform into military triumph, felt the weight of every setback, each failure a painful blow to his aspirations. In Kaifeng, whispers grew louder and more critical. Has the emperor bet too much on untested reforms? Are we provoking wars we cannot win? And political factions sharpened their attacks, using the military failures to undermine Shenzong's authority. Conservative ministers argued that the new laws had weakened military discipline rather than strengthened it, while supporters of reform insisted that victories would come in time and that the emperor should not retreat because of early difficulties. Shenzong, meanwhile, faced the painful truth that ideal policy could not instantly replace decades of structural military weakness. This period, though fraught with challenges, transformed Shenzong as a ruler. He became more introspective, more aware of the limits of imperial authority, yet more determined than ever to leave behind an empire capable of defending itself against any threat. It was also during these years that Shenzong expanded the imperial treasury to unprecedented levels. Through economic restructuring and growing state involvement in industry, especially tea, salt, and copper, the royal household accumulated immense wealth. Foreign envoys marveled at the glittering splendor of the Song court, where gold-plated pavilions, jade treasures, and priceless artworks filled the palace halls. Yet for Shenzong, wealth was never merely about luxury. It was a tool, fuel for reforms, support for military, and a symbol of national strength. But no amount of wealth could ease the internal fractures growing within his government. Toward the end of this period, political tension reached a breaking point. Wang Anshi, worn down by years of conflict and relentless criticism, offered to resign several times. Shenzong reluctantly accepted, understanding the personal toll the relentless opposition had taken on his most trusted advisor. The departure of his most trusted reform architect was a severe blow, and as conservatives gained more influence at court, many of the new laws were paused, altered, or reversed. The emperor watched with a heavy heart as parts of the vision he had fought so hard for began to unravel, the momentum of reform slowing and the forces of tradition reasserting themselves. These mid-reign years were a defining turning point for Shenzong. They forged him, not into the triumphant conqueror he had once aspired to be, but into a ruler deeply aware of the fragile balance between ambition and reality. The storms were not yet over, but a more seasoned emperor was emerging, one prepared to steer the vast Song Empire through its next great trials. As Emperor Shenzong entered the later phase of his reign, the winds of change that had once filled the empire with momentum began to shift. The new laws, once the banner of hope for a stronger and more resilient Song Dynasty, had become a battlefield for political rivalry. Factions rose and fell, alliances shifted, and the palace in Kaifeng was more divided than ever, with differing visions for the future of the empire. Yet amid this turbulence, Shenzong continued to wrestle with the central question that had driven him for years. How could the empire secure its future in a world filled with threats, both internal and external? The departure of Wang Anshi, his greatest reform partner, created a noticeable vacuum in the government. Although the emperor still supported many aspects of the new laws, he no longer had a single, unified reform team behind him. What remained was a patchwork of ministers, some cautiously supportive, others openly opposed, and many simply waiting to see which direction the political tide would turn. Still, Shenzong refused to abandon his broader vision. He began adjusting the reforms, blending both old principles and new methods, hoping to create a system that could satisfy both sides and foster a sense of unity. But as he attempted this delicate balancing act, he realized that the deeper conflict was not simply about policies. It was about power, identity, and the very definition of what the Song Dynasty should become. While the court argued, events beyond the palace walls demanded urgent attention. Tensions of the Western Xia remained unresolved. The earlier campaigns had not brought decisive victories, and border commanders continued to report raids, supply shortages, and logistical difficulties. Shenzong faced a painful truth. The Song Dynasty's military weakness was not a temporary flaw. It was structural, rooted in decades of underfunding, fragmented command, and dependence on mercenaries. This realization troubled him more than anything else. He ordered new investigations, auditing military expenses, reviewing troop numbers, and demanding clear reports on equipment and training. The findings were sobering. Many units existed only on paper. Corrupt officials inflated soldier counts to pocket extra pay, and supply networks were riddled with embezzlement. Even the empire's famed wealth could not solve this problem quickly. And so, Shenzong resolved to do something bold. He would personally take greater control of military strategy. In the central hall of the palace, surrounded by maps inked with black mountains and winding rivers, he spent countless nights reviewing campaigns of past dynasties, studying the successes of Tang generals and the failures of northern Song commanders. He sought to understand not only the art of warfare, but also the mindset of a ruler responsible for the lives of millions of soldiers spread across vast frontiers. During these years, the emperor's presence in the court subtly changed. He grew quieter, more contemplative, and more focused on the long-term implications of his decisions. Ministers noticed that he no longer spoke with the unshakable confidence of his early reform period. Instead, he asked more questions, listened more carefully, and weighed decisions with increasing gravity. But this did not mean he had grown weak, only wiser, tempered by the storms of leadership. One of the major undertakings in this period was the strengthening of the empire's frontier defenses. Shenzong invested heavily in fortifications, new watchtowers, and expanded supply routes across the northern plains. He appointed new generals, men not chosen for their political affiliation, but for their merit and proven competence. Some were veterans with decades of experience. Others were young commanders whose brilliance on the battlefield had earned them attention. Not all of these appointments were successful, but several made visible improvements. Small victories along the frontier boosted morale, and reports from the border revealed fewer raids and improved discipline among soldiers. Though not the grand triumphs that would rewrite history, these gains gave Shenzong a renewed sense of purpose and validated his commitment to strengthening the military. Meanwhile, the internal politics of the court continued to fracture. Conservative ministers pushed to reverse more of the new laws, claiming that the reforms had created confusion and instability across the empire. Reformist officials, though weakened, resisted fiercely, arguing that retreating now would waste years of progress and undermine the very foundation of the dynasty's future. Every proposal, no matter how small, became entangled in heated debate, making it difficult to achieve consensus on even the most basic issues. Shenzong found himself repeatedly caught between these opposing factions. He did not want to abandon the reforms entirely, yet he recognized that enforcing them too aggressively would only deepen internal turmoil and further divide the court. And so, in a series of careful and calculated moves, he modified several laws, adjusting the Green Sprouts loan program, restructuring military recruitment guidelines, and revising tax assessments. These compromises calmed the political fires temporarily, but the underlying tension remained, threatening to erupt again at any moment. Despite the political storms, the empire's economy continued to flourish. This was perhaps the greatest paradox of Shenzong's later reign. Trade expanded across the empire, paper money circulated more widely, and the Song capital, Kaifeng, became one of the most prosperous and densely populated cities on earth. Markets overflowed with silk, porcelain, spices, and iron tools, while merchants grew wealthy on domestic and international commerce. These thriving economic conditions strengthened the imperial treasury enormously, providing resources for both military and cultural endeavors. The royal household accumulated wealth that dazzled foreign visitors, reinforcing Shenzong's reputation as a ruler presiding over one of the richest nations of the medieval world. But wealth, he knew, was not enough to guarantee a secure future. It was during this period that Shenzong also focused intensely on culture and scholarship. He encouraged the compilation of new encyclopedias, promoted scientific studies, and supported the expansion of educational academies across the empire. Scholars developed advancements in mathematics, astronomy, and hydraulic engineering, fields crucial to the stability of a nation dependent on agriculture and river management. Shenzong believed that knowledge was one of the empire's greatest strengths, and he wanted the Song Dynasty to be not only wealthy, but intellectually unmatched. As the emperor aged, however, his health began to decline. The stresses of leading a vast empire, the weight of political conflict, and the emotional cost of military frustrations left visible marks on him. Court physicians advised him to rest more, but Shenzong, driven by a lifelong sense of duty, continued to work tirelessly, determined to leave a lasting legacy. These later years formed a complex portrait of a ruler who refused to surrender to weakness, to fear, or to political opposition. He had begun his reign determined to transform the empire, and even though the results were mixed, his resolve never diminished. Unbeknownst to him, the greatest test of his reign, and the final chapter of his life, were rapidly approaching. As Emperor Shenzong entered the final years of his reign, reflection and a sense of urgency guided his every decision. The early optimism of reform and military expansion had given way to a deeper, more nuanced understanding of the complexities and challenges of ruling a vast and diverse empire. Shenzong was no longer a young, idealistic emperor. He was a seasoned ruler, tempered by political strife, military setbacks, and relentless demands of governance. The internal court politics had never been more intricate. Factions had solidified, each vying for influence and advocating for its own vision of the empire's future. While the emperor retained ultimate authority, he had learned the art of compromise, recognizing that cooperation was often more effective than confrontation. Certain aspects of the new laws were modified or suspended to maintain stability and appease opposing factions. Yet even as some reforms were rolled back, Shenzong's core vision remained steadfast: to create a state capable of withstanding internal corruption and external threats while fostering cultural and intellectual prosperity. Foreign relations also demanded his careful and constant attention. The Liao and Western Xia kingdoms remained persistent pressures on the northern and western borders, requiring a delicate balance of diplomacy and military preparedness. Shenzong strengthened diplomatic channels while simultaneously maintaining a cautious military posture. He sent envoys with lavish gifts to neighboring states, combining displays of wealth with calculated gestures of power to deter aggression and maintain a fragile peace. These diplomatic strategies, coupled with ongoing fortification efforts, slowly stabilized the frontier regions, reducing the frequency and intensity of border conflicts. Economically, the Song Empire continued to thrive, maintaining its position as one of the wealthiest and most advanced civilizations in the world. The widespread circulation of paper money, the flourishing of domestic and international trade, and the state-managed monopolies in essential commodities like salt, tea, and copper generated enormous wealth for the imperial treasury, providing the financial resources necessary to support the empire's ambitious endeavors. Shenzong understood that economic strength was the indispensable foundation upon which military, cultural, and scientific advancements could stand. He actively encouraged investment in infrastructure, roads, canals, and urban development, which facilitated commerce, improved transportation, and strengthened the central government's reach into the far-flung provincial regions. Shenzong also placed a significant emphasis on cultural patronage, recognizing the importance of art, literature, and philosophy in shaping the identity and values of the empire. Libraries, academies, and scholarly institutions expanded under his reign, fostering a vibrant intellectual environment and attracting talented individuals from across the realm. Innovations in astronomy, mathematics, and engineering were actively sponsored, not only to elevate the level of knowledge, but also to improve the practical governance of the empire and enhance the lives of its citizens. Hydraulic projects were expanded and improved to prevent devastating floods and ensure reliable irrigation, which was critical for an agrarian society dependent on consistent and abundant harvests. Yet amidst these remarkable achievements, Shenzong faced the ultimate test of mortality and succession. His health had gradually declined, and he became acutely aware that the decisions he made in his final years would profoundly shape the dynasty's future. He concentrated his efforts on ensuring a smooth and orderly transition of power, carefully mentoring his heir, stabilizing the bureaucracy, and resolving any lingering political conflicts. His paramount goal was to ensure that the empire would not descend into chaos or instability due to weak leadership after his death. One of Shenzong's final and most significant initiatives involved reconciling the opposing factions at court, bridging the deep divisions that had plagued his reign. He encouraged dialogue and cooperation between conservatives and reformists, emphasizing the paramount importance of unity and collective purpose over adherence to rigid ideologies. While he could not completely resolve every conflict or eliminate all disagreements, he established important precedents for compromise and mutual respect, demonstrating that the emperor's wisdom sometimes lay in patience, diplomacy, and the ability to foster collaboration rather than relying solely on force or decree. Throughout his final years, Shenzong also became increasingly reflective, contemplating the lessons of his reign and seeking to impart his wisdom to future generations. He wrote and commissioned treatises on governance, history, and philosophy, emphasizing the importance of ethical leadership, sound economic management, and a deep understanding of the forces that shape the rise and fall of dynasties. These works would later serve as invaluable guidance for his successors, offering insights into the delicate balance between reform, tradition, and the enduring responsibilities of imperial leadership. The emperor's final months were marked by both a sense of accomplishment and a cautious awareness of the challenges that lay ahead. Economically, the empire was robust and prosperous. Culturally, it was vibrant and innovative, and diplomatically, it had achieved a relative degree of stability. Militarily, the reforms had yielded measurable improvements, although the Song army remained cautious in its engagements with neighboring powers, recognizing the need for continued vigilance. Shenzong accepted the reality that perfection was unattainable and that no ruler could completely eliminate all threats or resolve all conflicts. However, he took solace in the enduring progress that had been made during his reign and in the knowledge that he had laid a solid foundation for the future. When Shenzong passed away in 1085, he left behind an empire markedly different from the one he had inherited. While challenges undoubtedly remained, the foundations he had meticulously built in administration, military affairs, culture, and economy provided a strong basis for the Song Dynasty to continue to flourish and exert its influence for generations to come. His reign stands as a testament to the profound complexity of leadership, illustrating the necessity of a clear vision, the heavy burden of decision-making, and the delicate balance between ambition and pragmatism. The legacy of Emperor Shenzong serves as a reminder to historians that power is never absolute, Reform is never simple, and true wisdom often arises from navigating failure and adversity as much as from celebrating success and triumph. He had dedicated his life to strengthening his empire through bold and innovative policies, careful and thoughtful governance, and a deep commitment to cultural patronage. In doing so, he embodied the enduring challenge of rulership in one of the most prosperous and sophisticated empires of the medieval world. In retrospect, Shenzong's reign vividly illustrates that leadership is a continuous process of negotiation, with factions, with the state, and ultimately with one's own limitations. The Song Dynasty, through his tireless efforts and unwavering dedication, successfully navigated a period of significant political turbulence, strengthened its economy to unprecedented levels, and promoted intellectual and artistic achievements that would resonate for generations. In every brick laid, every law enacted, and every frontier secured, the guiding hand of Shenzong shaped the course of Chinese history for centuries to come, leaving an indelible mark on the cultural, political, and economic landscape of the nation.